You want to talk about politics?
Yeah, hit me up with a short Senate meme. What do you got?
Uh, Democrats, good chance to do it. They're really performing extremely well in Arizona, which is a strong indicator for a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so if you look at the political report, I would say that's probably my bet on what's going to happen. If there's like two weird things that are weird, like wild cards, the wild card is probably going to be in Georgia because there's a special election and normal election. So there's two Senate races in one state
Uh-huh.
at the same time. So that kind of like mixed messaging and politicking might benefit the campaigns in unique ways we haven't seen before.
Mm-hmm.
So far, the COVID, it's going to have like a flat normalization effect, but at the moment, it's not estimated to have like a serious like plus red or blue
I would
vote
be
change at the
like
moment.
super not trusting of any polling on that until we get closer to the election. I think it super
Yeah,
depends on what happens between now and
currently.
then. Yeah, currently maybe.
Well,
Yeah,
no,
approximately.
I'm not saying like what people's opinions are. That might
Mm-hmm.
change things, but I'm saying like currently, it's not like we haven't seen it's outside of New York, or we haven't seen a uniquely high hotspot that's just like, oh, that's going to completely flip the election results in like this district.
Sure, but
That's
we
what I'm
haven't gotten to
suggesting
like
currently.
ultra super
No,
serious campaigning yet either, right? When people start campaigning more for or against that issue, maybe we might see opinions shift a little bit.
well, no, I'm not talking about opinions on COVID-19. I'm just saying if like the death rates of COVID are going to affect the
Well, that's what I mean.
voting
Like in terms
results.
of like whether or not like a chair will flip, we'll probably see that more. I would imagine like closer to the election when people start campaigning for or against it, right? Like maybe the country's opinion right now on terms of who they'd vote for is a little lukewarm, but maybe once campaigning starts and people harp on it like super hard, maybe people's opinions start to swing one way or the other, right?
No. I agree with you like policy wise, but I'm saying like there hasn't been enough people like there was talks at one point semi jokingly, semi grimly that like if enough old people die in Florida, it can flip. That was what
Oh
people were
no!
talking
Oh
about.
yeah, no, that's not even. We
No,
would need to
yeah,
get into like the hundreds,
yeah, yeah,
where there are the millions of deaths
yeah.
across America to even begin to get to that. Yeah.
Well, like in theory, there are some districts where it was theoretically possible, like scientifically speaking, but
Mm-hmm.
no, there's not. We're not seeing enough death rates now. On the other hand, like there are chances that this could be that round two of this could be even nastier in like early fall or late summer. So we don't
Potentially,
know
yeah.
what that's good. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So epidemiologically, there are still risks there, but currently, based on the currently known models, I would say if someone offers you a bet that like COVID's gonna flip Florida or South Carolina blue, I wouldn't say take that bet.
Yeah.
So strong chance at minimum the if the Democrats win the presidency, so which gives them the vice presidency and the ability to win to get 51%,
Uh huh.
or get the vice presidency
18
flip.
Wait, hold on one second, one
Strong
second. Wait, one
chance.
second, one
naked
second.
sleep paralysis demons in Dan's bed at 3 a.m. balls hanging. Dan is scared. 18
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I don't care. So big donation. Go for it. Or a long
No,
donation.
of course. No, of course, man. I understand.
Mm-hmm.
Got to keep your constituents happy. Uh, if the Democrats win the presidency and this the vice presidency, strong likelihood the Democrats will have a slim majority in the Senate.
Uh huh.
Now maybe a little bit higher, but strong majority. So
Uh-huh.
so far based on the polling, the most interesting result is just how well the Democrats are doing in Arizona. Like
Sure.
Kelly might get a 10-point lead, which is unprecedented.
Mm-hmm. The real meme question I think that will be interesting is, will the majority be the new supermajority in the Senate? That's what I really want to see after the election.
I find it
What
funny
do you
that
mean a
Dan is
supermajority?
If Democrats are willing to play ball like the Republicans did and use 51 votes in the Senate to close cloture or whatever,
Oh yeah,
to like
yeah,
ram
yeah.
legislation through instead of requiring a supermajority, if all they need is a simple majority, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Oh, I mean, should they? Yes, and there at one point I like if you asked me 4 years ago would the Democrats ever do that?
Mm-hmm.
Harry Reid was pretty radical on it, but there were a lot of senators who were a bit more moderate on that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
There might be enough, especially under the fear that the Republicans might try to lock up or slow down Biden's court nominations, that will probably happen.
Mm-hmm.
Like Schumer would have to basically declare himself to be incredibly personally conservative to not allow that kind of reform in the Senate rules.
Yeah, they should probably like formally reform the Senate. It's just kind of stupid that parts of our government just rely on people being nice. Like, even the way that they get over like the supermajority stuff is like a pretty silly hack. It's like a
Yeah,
year one
well,
programming student oversight where it's like, oh, whoops, whether you should probably have like patched, but
I mean,
um,
in theory, the Senate rules are always re-agreed to every session in theory.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that we've kept certain ones for ritual and traditional reasons, and like
Yeah, but as
there's
soon
a lot
that's the
of
point. As
criticism
soon as
of
somebody wants to break them, you're fucked. You're like, oh, well.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't know what your perspective. Like I think I heard you discuss this. Like I personally think we should really limit the ability to like protest. Oh shoot. Fuck, I'm blanking on the word. God damn it. Take up time for a Senate speech, like
Filibuster.
filibuster. Thank you so much. I'm the professional. I'm blanking on it.
No problem.
I think we should probably limit the filibuster pretty dramatically.
Well, can you limit a filibuster? It seems like you either have it or you just get rid of it. There is no such
Well,
like limited filibuster is just discussion of a bill, right?
well, I mean, the proposal that was put on the table for a while was the basically removing the filibuster with basically your filibuster was you stand up saying I protest this and that's it.
Yeah.
Like that you don't stop the vote. It's
But
just
that's
a
like
declaration of protest.
that's not like a
essentially.
filibuster, right? The whole point of a filibuster is to prevent
Well,
legislation being
yes,
voted
yes,
on. Yeah.
yes. But so, what are your thoughts? Should we Should we end the filibuster?
The only reason why I like the filibuster, well, I don't know. Okay, tell me if I have my Senate rules wrong. My understanding is that the filibuster essentially means that you don't get legislation through without a supermajority in the Senate, right?
Well, it's not. In practice, yes. The filibuster is you're going to maintain the debate as long as one is speaking. In order to shut down the debate, you need a supermajority.
So you need 60 votes,
which can they allow?
right? Or 61?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
60.
Yeah, so you need 60 votes in order to shut down a filibuster. So filibusters essentially ensure that legislation that you pass through the Senate needs at least 60 votes to do it. Now, should we need 60 votes for major legislation to go through the Senate? I don't know. Should you be able to do it on a simple majority? I don't know. I guess I'm kind of in favor of getting rid of the filibuster, I think. I'm in favor, like, if you've got 51 votes in the Senate and you can get something through the House and you have the presidency, you should probably be able to get your agenda passed. It seems silly that you would need, like, the Senate is already, like, pretty powerful, given that, like, there are massive overrepresentation of voters in the U.S., right? Like, the Senate has states that have way more power per voter. Like, Wyoming's place in the Senate gives them so much more power per voter than, like, California's.
Oh.
What?
Go on. I'll talk.
Oh, yeah.
I'll go.
I think in some cases it's okay for disproportionate power. Like the Senate, I think is good. The Electoral College, I would kind of defend. But in terms of like passing legislation, I think 51 votes should get it through. I would say, yeah, 51 votes should get it through. Fuck them. Yeah. Okay.
So here's an interesting discussion, and it's something I always thought would be an interesting one to discuss because it's something that even not all like it's not even like a left wing versus right wing discussion. It's should we have electoral reform? Not just like the big thing that people talk about is often like, oh, should we end electoral college? I think yes. Should we? I think another thing I've got two other hot takes after that though. Besides ending electoral college, I think there's a very strong argument to lift the cap on the number of representatives, because in theory, if the lower house is supposed to represent the people and the Senate is supposed to represent the states, we need to keep that equal and maintain the equal representation of representatives. In return, we can implement what's something called the Wyoming rule, which would mean the smallest recognized congressional district would become the unit of measurement for congressional districts, which would mean that we'd increase the number of representatives by about 100, mostly allocated to California and Texas, New York, and Florida, and another state I'm thinking off the top of my head, who are the primary states which are highly underrepresented in the Congress. What are your thoughts on this?
So the hard one I have, so this is where everybody gets ass mad. I think it's important for 50 autonomous states to all feel like they have relatively decent representation in our congressional body. My big problem with like dramatic rebalancings of things in Congress is that like California, Florida, and Texas already have a fuck ton of representation in the House. And even in the Electoral College, so they have a ton of representation. So the idea of trying to rebalance things so that they get even more just seems like basically you'd have like 3 or 4 states like running the show to some extent.
Well, I would disagree. Well, one, that is where a majority of people in this country live, though.
Sure.
Like you're essentially you're saying the majority need to be underrepresented to empower the minority.
Yeah. And my argument there, my balance there is that like I think that like states should be viewed to some extent as having some like participation in the union and not just a matter of like how many people live there. Because like if we start like favoring groups of people rather than like the individual states themselves, like Wyoming, Nevada, Kansas, like all of the like there's like what, like 25 states that basically we would just never care about when writing legislation anymore.
Well, I mean, there's two counter arguments to that. One,
Mhm.
I could argue and defend it, but I'm not talking about like ending the Senate. Like in theory, the Senate is the thing that empowers those states.
Mhm.
And currently, right now, those states are empowered by both the Senate
And
and the House of Representatives.
the
They are,
Senate and the Electoral
and
College,
the
yeah.
Electoral College.
And to some
Yeah.
extent, the House of
So
Representatives, yeah, sure.
yeah.
Mhm.
So we could equalize that by at least having the House of Representatives be equal to that, the
Mhm.
Senate, in terms of how they accurately represent the population. The additional thing is we already, because of the perspective of power politics, don't equally represent states. Like via the Electoral College, like California, Texas, they don't get visits. They're not competitive. Only a few states are visited
Okay,
already.
well,
But
yeah. So, like, the reason I don't agree with that, the idea that like, oh, people don't campaign in California or Texas or whatever, I don't know if that's because we have an electoral college or because states don't divvy up their electoral votes. That's always been really weird to me. Like, even if I'll
well,
defend the electoral college, like everybody should do it like Nebraska and Maine, where your votes are awarded proportionally. Because I do agree. Because right now, why the fuck would you campaign in a solidly blue state? But that's not because of the electoral college. That's because states are all or nothing when it comes to their electoral votes.
sure,
Like
but
because there are
even
pockets of conservatives in California, right? Central
oh
California,
no,
like
well,
right.
most definitely. Well, the thing I always find interesting is even if you calculate per capita, where do most donations to get the Republican Party come from?
Where do they come from?
California.
Sure.
California is the origin for the vast majority of Republican fundraising.
Uh huh.
Republicans, we can joke about it, but Republicans do not. They do exist in California, and I think they do have a right to vote.
Mm-hmm.
I just think it's important that they be represented accurately, because right now you could argue, especially if California was made more representative, Republicans would have more rights to vote in California also.
Mm-hmm.
Because right now they are arguably underrepresented, depending on who you talk to in California, because of the limitations of how many representatives we have.
Sure.
At minimum, we do need to talk about the House of Representatives is supposed to be representative of the American population.
Yeah.
I'm not saying.
I agree somewhat. Like, there's probably too much representation right now on the side of states because the House of Representatives disproportionately favors smaller states, the Senate disproportionately, massively favors smaller states, and then the Electoral College also favors smaller states. There's probably something that can give here. So whether it's like a total rebalance of the House or whether it's a rebalance of the Electoral College, like, yeah, there's probably something that can change there. Yeah.
So I think you can make a really strong argument that a lot of the quote problems that we have in this country are the cause of this. Like, for example, I recall a conversation I watched you have once a long time ago about how you discussed it, like obesity is a major problem in this country and we need to solve it through like state policy or reforms to state policy, correct?
Yeah.
Well, the reason for that is because we've so heavily subsidized American agriculture.
Yeah.
Why have we heavily subsidized American agriculture? It's because states where agriculture is their primary economic output are overrepresented in the government.
Isn't agriculture kind of important to like a ton of states though?
It is. Like California is the leading state of agriculture, but like for example, if we go to like Wyoming, if we go to like Indiana, states with very small populations with only a couple of representatives, but still 2 senators, it's their primary economy, and that's what matters. Like Rhode Island, like to use an example, like Delaware is a state with only 2 senators and I think 2 representatives. I forget if it's 2 or 3. But their primary economy is financial. Like that's their big thing. Now we can debate if it's right or wrong what they do with how they organize their financials, but that's the primary motivation for a lot of regulation around financials. Like that's the interest of their party because of their representatives, because financial institutions are such a key portion of the economy. California has been a leading element on technology because technology is a leading portion of their economy. So even small states, which are not the majority of the gross agricultural production in this country, because it is the gross economic situation of their individual states, it's their primary focus for lobbying, reform, and regulation.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I'm wondering is it just like because I know that states like California have like massive agricultural industries as well. I don't know if like agriculture subsidies would go away if California got a bigger say in things because agriculture is a huge part of the California economy as well, right?
Well, again, in portion of the California economy, sure, but if we're talking about like reforms to like that power, like it's the Senate that dictates a lot of that stuff. Because effectively, if you're a farmer in California and you're trying to like lobby your senator, you're also competing with all the tech lobbyists, you're competing with all the military lobbyists, you're competing with all the like all that stuff. But in Indiana, who else are you competing with? Who else is going to compete for your lobbying dollars in Iowa?
Yeah, sure. I understand. Yeah.
So You can debate. I don't know. I don't think you consider me a socialist, but
Mhm.
someone was called. But so, what do you think? Has my radical idea of equalizing the House of Representatives by lifting the cap on
Yeah, no, I think that
a
rebalancing at
rational
least like
idea?
one part is probably would probably make sense, considering that right now states are overrepresented in all three realms in terms of president and both houses of Congress. I think rebalancing like one part is okay. Sure.
Could you agree to both the Electoral College and the House of Representatives? Because that's my personal opinion.
Um, I don't think it should. It feels bad to do it by like mob vote for president, I guess. What are the stats?
Why
What are
do
the
you say that?
breakdowns between Democrat and Republican?
In terms of populations?
Yeah. If we were to do it just based on numbers, would it always be a Democratic president for the rest of the life, for the rest of like the U.S. history?
Well, I could argue that about what that would mean,
Mm-hmm.
because I would argue it's less that the parties are permanent. It's more the parties have organized themselves into like groups that theoretically can win 50%, 1% of the electoral vote.
Mm-hmm.
The Republicans are, I mean, obviously we're talking the electorate because I think it's 30% to 40% of Americans don't vote, which is which is a secondary problem.
Yeah.
But so we're just talking about electorate. I think Republicans are technically 40 to 45% of the electorate
Mm-hmm.
in theory. They are like that because 45% of the electorate typically gets you 51 to 55% of the Electoral College.
Uh huh.
If you pick that 45% of the electorate in the right states, I think
Sure.
we all know the famous map where in theory you can win the Electoral College with I think like 20% of the vote or less than that. I think something insane
Mm-hmm.
in theory. And the only reason that hasn't happened is because that's a very different coalition to build. But the Republicans have organized that way. I would imagine, in the same way like a market economy would change things if regulations were introduced, if we said you need a popular vote to become president, the natural economics of our society would motivate reforms in the Republican Party,
Mm-hmm.
which would probably make them less racist, less evangelical, maybe even less radical, dare I say. That would help them put towards a governing majority of 51% of the popular vote.
I feel like that's already happening in states like Texas and Florida, though. Although maybe you could argue it would happen
Exactly.
quicker because the demographics are starting to shift there a little bit.
Well, why is it happening in Texas and Florida?
Because the demographics are shifting a bit, and as the
Well,
Hispanic vote grows and the white vote shrinks, you need to appeal to different groups of
e-
people.
exactly. Well, also because the federal government has in past recent history, prevented those state governments from putting some more barriers in the way of people voting.
Mm-hmm.
There was the famous Republican autopsy report after the 2012 election about talking about how they need to become less radical, less homophobic, more accepting of minorities.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't like the Republican Party because I think their ideas are failed, they're flawed, and they're very apathetic. But at least in theory, I rather have the conservative party of the United States not be a white ethno party
Yeah,
because that would
let's start
probably
with the
lower the
moderates
stakes a
then.
bit.
Mm-hmm.
But because we don't require the presidency, or for that matter, the House of Representatives to accurately represent the population, it enables them to focus on just this key 40% of the population, which allows them to be a white ethno party.
Sure.
So,
Yeah, I mean,
what's your
I don't disagree that like there needs to be some. I just I don't want to go to one extreme where it's literally like California, Texas, and Florida are like setting the agenda for every other state for the rest of like mankind. Like that seems like it would be like a pretty shitty area if those states were essentially dictating, because California has the population of what, like 20 or 25 United States. Like, are you like
well, we talking about the population? Or are we talking about the electorate? Or we're talking about the
population
citizen
in terms of
population?
citizen population? Like, if you
Okay,
add up like
that's different.
uh-huh.
About 30%. It's about 25 to 30%, depending if you count undocumented immigrants, essentially.
Sure, but like I'm willing to bet that outweighs probably like 30 or 25 different states if you were to like collectively add them together.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, recall like Wyoming's population I think 700,000.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so like if you were to set it up, in a certain way, it seems like you like literally the majority of the legislation being pumped out of the House will just come from like California, Texas, Florida. Like, is that a worry? Do you think that something like that could ever happen? And then every other state is just like, fuck you guys. Like, you have no power in the House.
Well,
like, who cares?
Well, let's look. Those three states, like, it's not necessarily like their large geography. That doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
What matters is there's large Latino immigrant groups who are the largest, most notable immigrant minority community immigrating to this country who are becoming citizens.
Mm-hmm.
They have large developing. They're largely on the coast because that's whether most people in this country seem to prefer. They are where a lot of tech jobs are going, where a lot of economic development is going, and a lot of that's because of the free market, not because like the government's uniquely offering subsidies to these three states. It's the market declaring that these states are going to be where a lot of the population is growing.
Sure. But like, let's say that there was some bill that needed to be passed relating to like the economic development of like smaller states to make them more competitive with larger ones. How does that ever get out of the House?
I mean, we do that already. Like already, vast majority of states get more from the federal government than they put in, proportional to their population.
Yeah, but that just has to do with like the relative sizes of the state right now, right? But I'm saying like
Well, no,
if larger states had the ability to block that, you don't think there'd be that risk at all? Like if some big economic development package went through that favored like some smaller states, like it seems like the larger states could literally just bully them out of that like every single time, no?
well, I like to think of it. These aren't states. It's just a majority of people. If a majority of people in California, Texas, and Florida
Mm-hmm.
think that we shouldn't be spending trillions of dollars on Wyoming, then who am I to say a majority of people are wrong? Like again, part of it wanted me to talk to you about this because I had a lot of free time yesterday. I watched all the quote REM drama and stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
and regardless of what we're talking about, native or First People communities or whatever, I think there's a very interesting discussion about governance when
Mm-hmm.
it comes to the rule of the minority, the rule of the majority. It's going to be one or the other always.
Mm-hmm.
The question is which one is more or less moral.
Yeah, for sure. And it would depend on each issue, right?
Well,
Yeah, it would depend on the
I
issue.
think
Right. Like
oh,
we would allow the minorities to be strong when it comes to like representing like the discrimination against like black people at the workplace, right? Like we want
yeah.
minorities to have power over white people there. But we don't want like a minority of people like arguably deciding like legislation in like the Senate and House, right? Like if just all the small states were making all the calls, like that's not good, right? Yeah.
Well, again, like I will admit sometimes I do feel because again, like I'm talking purely from like this is what I think should happen
Mm-hmm.
from a perspective of a political character of like me talking about what would be best for the Democratic Party and my political motives. Oh yeah, like we should have a popular vote. We should do away with the Senate. We should end the Supreme Court and put these questions of constitutionality up to plebiscite. Like that would be the radical political agenda of me talking. But in terms of like what I think would be good governance, yeah, no, I agree. What I think is interesting is we're getting a breaking point. Like it's expected at the rate of population growth, like if we're not going to be recognizing like farm laborers or ranch hands as citizens because of the complicated status of immigration in this country, like Wyoming might dip to below 500,000 people within the next 2 decades based on its population growth. And we need to like debate if it's
Do we like annex
healthy
these
for,
states with like other states,
well,
or what is the?
I mean, I don't know. Like there, I mean, like there are a lot. There's been issues like this previously in American and other political history, but it's a recognition that we do need to have vehicles for political reform. We need to accept that federalism might not work out for the long term of our state governance.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah,
mean,
that would be interesting. Like literally eliminating all states and maybe just grouping things a little bit differently or whatever. It does seem like as states exist, they need to be respected. Like even if we say that we're all Americans, like people identify pretty strongly with where they come from. Sometimes states, sometimes cities. And I
well,
think
I don't know. I would like to debate you on that. Actually,
I would, yeah, I'd stand by that 1,000%. Go for it.
I mean, do you identify as an Arkansan right now?
Well, I'm from Nebraska, right?
I'm so sorry. I thought you were from Arkansas. I'm so sorry.
Nope.
Do you identify as a Nebraskan?
I don't, but I'm really unique. I don't care about white people, English, the United States, or anything. But like in terms of like the people that live in certain areas, I would say that people definitely identify as like I'm from Ohio, I'm from Nebraska, I'm from Alabama. I'm talking college football, but like yeah, I think people like feel pretty strongly.
If you went to a professional network event or something like that in Japan next week, would you say you're from Would you say you work in California?
No, on an international level, you'd probably identify with your country, right?
Oh, okay. If you went to a professional event in New York, would you say you work in California?
Yeah, people have huge differences in attitudes, right? Look at the like West Coast versus East Coast or whatever. Yeah, right.
Yeah, but would you identify as a Californian?
It's bad to ask me. So if you're saying in general, I don't care about anything, but I'm very unique there. Like so, yeah. Would you say like in general, like a person going to one of these things, I think would have a strong identification where they come from. Yeah.
In my experience, now I say that as someone that works heavily nationally, does a lot of work in politics.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you'd have a point if we're talking about people over the age of like 45.
Uh-huh.
But because there's so much need to move to for where work is, for where education is, I think I think that's going away. Like if you like, I'm gonna be like, I love California. I really do. I'm very lucky and happy to live, grown up here and live here, and where I'm working here now. But I'm not gonna lie. Like if you offered me a job that was a 20% increase to my salary,
Mm-hmm.
if I had to move to Florida, I'd take it.
Yeah, I'm sure
It
you'd
was
take it, but like I still think people identify like really strongly, like especially like in southern states, like people that are from like Texas or Louisiana or like Florida or Georgia or Alabama, like these people like are, I think, are pretty big on like their state and like their state like doing well. It's like a big thing for a lot of these people, and especially like California, New York City, like people that live yeah, or places like Seattle, Oregon, like I don't know. It feels like people pretty strongly identify with like their little region that they're at. That still seems to be a thing, but I don't really have any
well,
data on
so
that. That's just a feeling I got. I could be wrong.
there's mixed data on it. I could bring I have some I remember looking at some polls about this, and it's both there's strong suggestions both ways.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm more wondering is it useful for our society, our national society, and national economic policy? Like
No,
like
of course
is it
not. The most useful thing would be
a,
for nobody to identify with any border at all and just identify as humanity, right?
exactly?
But that's
So
like,
should government policy encourage that then though?
um, well,
Like
it's a
so
question of
like
like what's possible versus what would be the best thing. I mean, the best thing would be to have no states and we just are all part of the U.S. and or the
well
United
exactly
whatever. I don't know. Yeah.
like look, right now I actually heard someone talking about this.
Mm-hmm.
I found it fascinating, and someone suggested to me that all these tech guys and internet people are gentrifying California. They should just stay in their states and do their internet there instead of increasing the rent around here.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, like gentrification is a complicated subject, but like I'm really happy and proud to say like I live in a state where like my neighbors are from all over the country, and some left for terrible reasons because they were afraid of homophobic neighbors, and
Mm-hmm.
some left because they had great opportunity.
Sure.
But on the other hand, like it's making rent more expensive. Like not even just in Los Angeles, most of the state's costs have gone up because so many people move here from
Mm-hmm.
outside the state.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's good. I think that's. But on the other hand, should we use society to defend people? Because naturally, politics motivates a maintenance of the status quo. There's a reason that so much anti-gentrification politics is really popular,
Mm-hmm.
because the people that live in your district now vote for you. The people that will live in your district can't currently vote for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's a
But
complicated issue.
I mean, I think from previous conversations, you're against rent control, if I recall.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, so should we organize society to help people who are being should we organize society to discourage people from building like localized identities?
I mean, like, I mean, in my dream, I would say, yeah, yeah, of course. I think like being allegiant to a state or whatever is stupid as fuck. I'm just looking at
Sure,
like how people like
sure.
really organize themselves. Yeah.
In big international neoliberal globals, I'm sure. But if
Mm-hmm.
we're talking like policy over the next like 10 to 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
Should we get rid of states, or what are you asking in particular?
Well, like is this not get rid of states. I'm talking about like if we should we focus more on creating a collective greater good than like an individual good,
Yeah, I mean, I'd say
whether
so. But I
that
mean,
be
I think the country's politics right now are more divided than they ever have been in the history of the United States. But I mean, I think that's bad, and we
well.
should focus more on collectivist shit, right?
So actually, that's another interesting topic,
Mm-hmm.
and this is something I'm really torn on. Like, I think like COVID-19 might be the greatest example of like American political division. Like, it's become a culture issue to be healthy.
Sure.
Like people, which is I would hope everyone's wearing their masks and being safe, but like people are, it's politically they're being rebellious and demonstrating their it's a culture war over it.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you do? Like if you have a set of beliefs, I think I have a set of beliefs. We both seem to agree, and we both have came to an agreement with those beliefs without any to violence. If there are people who are so dead set against it, whether we're talking about people who are against a pipeline because it will help, like it might bring jobs for everyone, but it lessens their economic development, or because we want to change how the laws are so the better enable economic development and less racism. Like, at what point do we need to accept that we need to really fight back against the people who are against these things?
Yeah, I mean, when you say fight back against people, you mean like be
Well,
more
like,
collective, or what do you
so
mean?
so well, so like, let's use plain English. Like, the Republican Party is designed around the idea of suppressing the vote of a significant amount of people in order to maintain their political power.
Mm-hmm.
I would argue that the reason we have perpetuated our unequal representative system is to maintain their power.
Sure.
I have suggested ways to limit their power through
Mhm.
like, hey, let's increase the number of representatives. Let's maybe in like Electoral College. I mean, you get me buzzed or drunk enough, I'll say we should end the Senate and put the Supreme Court to a plebiscite.
Sure.
Do you oppose the now? You oppose those things.
So
Some of
even
those
though I
things.
hate the Republican Party, if we want democracy to work, I think that people should feel like their votes are being represented. And people identify across different ways. Like people, individuals want their vote represented. States want their votes represented. Cities or municipalities might want their vote represented, like in those ways. And I think that for your democracy to function, like even if you're from a smaller state, you probably want to feel like you have some say or something to do with running your democratic body, rather than just, oh, well, there's only 500,000 people that live in Wyoming. I guess we just don't matter anymore. Like we might as well not even
Sure.
be Americans. It's like, yeah, my worry, I
Well,
guess.
well, what's this difference between a undemocratic extreme minority of a reactionary ritualistic tribe and the Republican Party in Wyoming?
Well, I mean, like, I think the Republican Party is bad, but like, if I live in a democratic body, like you're asking me to embrace authoritarianism, like I don't like you're asking me to take up like literally the opposite or the same
Well,
position
so
as the Republicans. So like they don't want to expand voting rights and whatnot because they don't want their power to be threatened. I'm going to change the electoral system just to eliminate that political party. Like I don't think I should want
yeah.
to do that in a democratic system, right? I still want people
Well,
to feel like they're being expressed or being represented in whatever manner, right?
but Stephen, we've already crossed the bridge when it comes to the other people thinking of us as authoritarian because we think because people of decent empathy think that everyone deserves the right to vote. That's immediately an attack on Republicans because naturally Republicans believe that certain people don't have a right to vote.
Mm-hmm.
That they see that as authoritarianism.
Sure.
We've already crossed that Rubicon when it comes to are we doing authoritarianism in their eyes.
Okay. But I mean, that still means you can make a choice on whether or not you want to be authoritarian, right?
I mean, we can choose. I mean,
Like in like a perfect world, and yeah, fuck the Republican Party, make everything
I'm so
Democratic
sorry. I
Party.
need to take a phone call.
Oh yeah, go for it. Yeah, that's fine. He's fucked. They're calling him. He's donezo now. You are ecstatic to watch America let you right now. Yeah, you're like, oh, we can't do anything better. Like you sound you sound so pathetic. How you look at your